The napkin ripped a small quiet in the room. Ink feathered through linen. 4 words shoved forward like a warning shoved under a door. They spit in your food. Candlelight trembled on the fork's tines. Rosemary smoke lifting in a thin ribbon. And Malcolm Devo, billionaire in a navy hoodie that erased him, held still as if stillness could keep the world from smearing. He didn't eat. He pressed the crease with his thumb until the cloth remembered the fold. Across the cradle's dining room, velvet drapes, gold rims, portraits without captions. The service doors coughed out bleach every time they swung, each breath a metronome counting down to a choice. Everything all right, sire. The manager's smile had product on it, edges lacquered to withstand consequence. He was the type who touched shoulders like he owned them and measured rooms in watches, and his eyes slid over Malcolm's hoodie, the way a host slides over the name of a donor who didn't show. Your office, Malcolm said. He put the fork down, the napkin back into the hoodie like a fuse, and stood without scraping chair leg on walnut. Under the table, his sneakers squeaked once. A cheap shoe truth, and the hostess flinched, because the sound didn't belong to the version of the restaurant they sold to people who bought adjectives. They passed certificates that congratulated the wall for existing. A draft seeped from a vent and carried printer heat, old coffee, a toner tang that coats your tongue. The manager, Clay, according to the badge he wore half hidden, opened the door on a room that looked like an apology. Gray carpet, a dental file cabinet, a monitor, asleep like a conscience pretending. Guest experiences are the kitchen cameras, Malcolm said, gently enough to be a blade. Clay's smile tried to hold shape, then slid, and he dragged windows across the screen until stainless stations tiled the monitor heat lamps like small suns. Hands darting in a practiced language, steam painting truths on steel. These feeds are mostly for inventory. He picked up the sentence like a shield and stood under it. On screen, time traveled straight until it didn't. An incision of 2 minutes, 12 seconds cut out clean between grill flare and pass. A gap. So exact, it stopped being accident and started being choice. Looping happens when the memory, enough, Malcolm said. One word set steady, the measure for the rest. He took out a burn phone with a rubber case and sent verbs into the room like men in jackets, pull cloud backups, image the DVR bit for bit, hash and seal, no power cycles, and watched Clay's throat remember how to swallow. Sir, who exactly are you? The man who signs your checks. He didn't raise his voice because paper carries authority better. He let the sentence sit until the room heard it, then pocketed the phone and walked back through the corridor, wanting the dining room to witness a picture of 2 men returning from different stories. The hostess straightened. Her smile found the page of the script where kindness performs its best imitation. Servers navigated around them with trays like verdicts, and at the edge of the service alley, a waitress with tired shoes and steady eyes, Naomi looked right at him, the way people look when they have already paid the toll for courage. He gave her one nod. She didn't return it. A glint of fear flicked and went out like a pilot light catching. The napkin warmed against his ribs, a small heat with a lot to say, and he left through the front, where the white columns looked like teeth and the porch light threw clean geometry down the steps. Outside, night leaned heavy with salt. A saxophone, 2 blocks over, worked a wrong note until it was right. Malcolm stood in the soft throb of a neon sign and called New York, voice low. Sentences short enough to carry through static subpoena vendor logs. Preserve chain. Connect DA. Staff paid if we close, and hung up before anger could make promises he didn't need. He walked Cicadas did their static hymn. Tires hissed over old brick. He counted steps because he always had 10 to the alley, 30 to the crossing, and found a bench under live oaks that held the heat like memory. Then opened the cloud viewer and watched the quick, obscene arc over meat that the local footage tried to forget. He paused the frame. The sous chef's laugh hung in the tinny audio like rusted silverware. A muttered line, "That's what you get for acting like you belong," bloomed in his earphones, and he sat back until the anger cooled into a ruler, not a knife, because rulers draw straight lines and knives just make smaller pieces of the same mistake. He texted his mother, "You up? Love you." Dots arrived. Then, always, eat, and he typed, "later," and let it be a delay rather than a lie. Watching the timestamp tick and tick, 2 minutes, 12 seconds, a hole big enough to hide a culture. Back in the room that wasn't his, carpet remembered other people's feet. He hung the hoodie over a chair like a shed skin that could testify. On the desk, he laid his phone, wrote sutures to legal capture, encrypt, read-only mount, documented chain, and to PR close to audit, publish numbers, not adjectives, pay everyone, and then let the air conditioner lie about mountains, while he tried sleep like a new habit. Morning shaved the city down to slate. He opened the cradle before the linen truck. Chairs waited with soldier patience. Candle stubs held their last, and the portraits without captions watched a room that no longer wanted to pretend it didn't know who it had been. The back door exhaled metal. A dishwasher came in early with a backpack, one strap away from quitting. "Morning," Malcolm said, and the man said, "Morning, Seer," with the wary politeness of people who keep the world from smelling and rarely get thanked for it. And already the room leaned half a degree toward honest. 9 a.m. The office turned lab. The forensic tech wore calm like a tool and placed the DVR on anti-static, as if laying down a relic. "We image, we hash," she said, sliding a form forward, and the DA's investigator clicked his pen like a metronome, while Elena from the union set her legal pad down. "The way you set a brick where a wall needs one," he signed custodian. The ink felt heavier than a speech, which is how you know it's doing its job. The napkin lived against his chest motif, and fused its fold, a ridge he touched once with the heel of his hand before he let the day move, because touching talismans doesn't change math, but it can steady handwriting. They broke for air. In the hallway, a line cook hovered like a hesitant sparrow. "I saw some things," she said, voice too level for her age. And when he asked, "What do you want now?" she said, "To work without that," and he told her the investigator would write the verbs, and that if anyone made her pay for telling, he would invoice them with a lawyer. Noon turned up with a pocket of heat. Plainclothes agents stepped through the door wearing the ordinary gravity of paper that has been signed. The chef tried the back and found the front. The sous chef rehearsed innocence and lost his place. Clay came with his tie, loosened to apology, and the dining room went suddenly quiet in the way of places that don't know where to look. He took the steps slow. Cameras lifted their small red eyes. "Yesterday, a customer gave us a truth we couldn't ignore," he said, voice set to fact. And when he gestured toward Naomi, no halo, just a woman who had done a dangerous small thing exactly right. The microphone stayed pointed, but the room's attention moved to her anyway. Inside, staff dragged chairs into a circle. Rows make performance. Circles make witness. HR handed one sheet. "You are safe to speak. You will be paid." Anonymous portal here. And people said what they could carry. Flow, that was code for move them. Brand maintenance, that was code for Keep the room looking a certain way. Laugh tracks that stuck to the walls. He listened. He didn't write lines for other people's mouths. He made space for the ones they already had. When someone cried, the room didn't rush to fix it, because some silences are the work, and out of that quiet came a sentence he would keep. Your back remembers patterns, mister. Mike said it like a diagnosis and a cure. Dusk wore the windows down to mirrors. The portraits watched with different eyes, some already off the wall, rectangles of paler paint like undone bandages. He stood under one of those ghosts and let the building learn its new shape, then slid the napkin from his hoodie and refolded it, corners sharp, edges true, before tucking it back, as if returning a tool to its cloth roll. The door clicked when he locked it. Street heat held steady. Oaks kept their gossip. Down the block, the saxophone found the hinge tone again. Not triumph, not grief, the sound a door makes between room, and he counted steps to the corner like he always had 10, 30, 58 carrying linen. Not luck, into a night that had decided to stop pretending. The fold pressed her palm. A square of linen in Naomi's locker held a crease like a held breath, the edge of it cutting a neat line in the dim where lemon cleaner and hot steel had married overnight. She closed the door with her shoulder and felt the building wake through the hinges. Friars coughing, ice machine clearing its throat, the service doors already practicing their sigh. She walked the line, steam wobbled the lights, salt and rosemary, riding the air as if invited. Her shoes took the scuffs, no one saw, the rubber whispering across grout, while the POS screen blinked law and glitch, her initials converting to access, to tables and timers, and the small permissions that made or unmade dignity by the minute. Morning, Ms. N. Mr. Mike stacked trays like he was sorting days wet steel, clean edge, a rhythm that forgave nothing and wasted less. He slid her a paper cup of water and nodded at the heat lamps coming on, the bulbs humming like insects in July, and she drank until the cup remembered her lip. She took a station check, flat top at a tempered shimmer, hood rattling like far rain. From the pass, she watched the floor breathe, the thick glass at the front door catching the first wrong fingerprints, the portraits on the wall, muttering in their gilded frames, the bar top, carrying a sticky map of last night's decisions she would help wipe away. The hostess rehearsed a smile. She smoothed a cloth over the podium as if petting a skittish animal. Naomi stepped behind her, checked the reservation spine, and shifted 2 parties forward in her head, the motion small enough to pass as habit, but large enough to keep one table out of the dark corner that taught people how to disappear. Card printer jammed again. Bean popped the lid, laughed at the tangle like it had done this on purpose. Together they pulled the receipt's rib cage back into its roll, the paper warm and slick as breath, and Naomi felt her shoulders settle into the work, the way a body remembers an old song when the first note lands. Midday sharpened. Cooks argued with salt, the way families argue with love. Rick's laugh cracked across metal, a short sound with elbows, and Naomi let it skate by without catching. Eyes on the expeditor, voice clean. 2 on 6. 1. No butter. Allergy, not preference, because clarity, when it's most needed, can't afford flourish. She tightened the tie at her waist. Clay's shoes announced themselves on the tile before his voice did. Smooth start, he asked, but he wasn't asking. He was calibrating, gaze skimming for heat pockets and soft spots, and she kept her hands still at her sides because stillness reads as competence. When rooms are looking for wrong, we're good. Her mouth did not borrow the word sir. He leaned in too near, citrus cologne chewing at the lemon cleaner, and mentioned a party of 4 at the door. Influential, time-sensitive, a dozen euphemisms for move somebody else. She held his stare until he blinked, then said, "We seat by time," and watched the idea try on its new suit. He smiled the policy smile. "You're a pro," he said, and moved off, his clipboard underarm like a trimmed wing. Behind him, Naomi adjusted the host grid, hands calm, rerouting bodies with the finesse that separates triage from theater. And Bean, eyes up, breathed in sync without needing word. A two-person operation that made space where there had been none. The first rush came like weather, feet on wood, jingle of glass, the hush of money trying not to sound like itself. Naomi slid between tables, fingers grazing chairbacks to announce her presence, a glass of water set down with the softness of apology without the sin. And in the middle of it she felt the fold in her locker as a fixed point, a compass pressed in cotton. At table 12, a man pointed. "Portrait," he said. "Who are they?" "People who did work," Naomi answered, eyes on his hands, not his question, because hands tell you whether a person wants food or proof, and he nodded as if he understood that pictures could be instructions if you let them. Quiet beat, unplanned. The espresso machine paused between shots like it had remembered the rules of breath. In that small stillness, the kitchen sound fell away. No hiss, no ping, only the building's low pulse, and Naomi let her jaw hang a fraction until blood unclenched her teeth, and the world slid back into gear. "Hi there," a young server new kid. Sharp corners angled close with the awkward bravery of someone walking a dog too strong. "What's the line when they ask why the corner's closed?" he whispered, and Naomi gave him the sentence to practice under his breath. "We're balancing the room. Thank you for your patience." A string of words that didn't collapse when you set plates on them. Rick's voice rose. "Brand maintenance," he said to the sous like a toast poured mean. Naomi didn't flinch. The expeditor didn't blink. Mr. Mike didn't stop stacking. Only the hood changed pitch, pulling air harder, like the room itself had decided which words to keep and which to suction away. She moved toward the pass. Steam wet her forearms. The heat kissed hard, and then apologized. 2 trout to 8, she said, catching the glare of the heat lamp on the rim, and when the plates were lifted, she saw her reflection as a blur in the stainless. No hero, no prop, just a woman holding the line that keeps dining from turning into theater you pay too much for. Mid-shift, the fold returned, not in her locker in the way her body aligned around a sentence she hadn't said yet. A walk-in in a hoodie and tired eyes stepped to the podium, and Bean looked back. Naomi arrived before the look finished traveling, turned the grid with 2 fingers, and found a 2-top that wasn't a punishment. A seat with a candle that didn't ask for a password to light. "Thanks," the man said. He didn't make a story about it. He made room for his hands on the table. She left a pitcher of water without flourish, and felt the napkin's idea change shape, no longer a warning under a plate, more a fold in a map that keeps you from walking off the edge you can't see until you're falling. Later, the room shifted keys. Candlelight lowered its shoulders. Expensive laughter softened to inside voices. She wrote a comp for a mistake without calling it a favor, wiped a ring from the bar with a cloth that left citrus behind, and watched as a couple under Septima. Clark read the caption and leaned closer until their heads shared a piece of air. Clay reappeared. He hovered at the edge of the kitchen like a man who'd lost his place in a script. "Good pace," he said, eyes on the monitors, the green squares turning yellow. Then back, and she nodded once. "Neutral." then walked away before he could misread her stillness for consent to anything but gravity and heat. She caught Bean's eye. "Switch me 2 and 9 at 1/4 past," Naomi said. Bean tapped the grid and nodded. And when Naomi crossed the floor with that change tucked clean in her body, she felt the room take the load without lurching, the way a good friend takes your bag off your shoulder without asking. And you don't tip because this isn't service. It's understanding. Pre-climax quiet. A wine cork popped, soft as a shoulder being set back into place. Naomi paused at the service doors, palms on the push plates, breath fogging the small rectangle of glass, a hinge of a moment where the night balanced on how she would carry the next plate, what she would let slide, what she would fix, even if fixing cost. A couple near the bar stiffened. "Card, please," the newer server said, too loud, too fast. Naomi reached his elbow, tipped her chin toward the policy posted at eye level, modulated the room with a low "take your time, thank you," and watched the man nod, lips easing, the woman's fingers leaving the tight grasp they'd made around her napkin. The clock stumbled toward close. Dishes thin to sugar. Naomi read the final tickets like whether one more trout, 2 coffees, a check that wanted to linger. And when she cut through the alley for air, mosquitoes wrote their brief opinions on her ankles, while a saxophone down the block rehearsed its wrong note into something that almost forgave the day. She finished the count. Tips in neat stacks, cylinder of pens reconstructed from chaos, the grid saved to a file that could prove fairness did not require luck. At her locker, she touched the linen square, pressed the fold, so it remembered, and slid it back into the book, where she kept recipes for courage, the ones you can cook on low heat, all day, without scorching. On her way out, she stopped at the wall. The portraits breathed different under the new bulbs. Naomi reached up and straightened one frame by a heartbeat, then stood with hands loose and shoulders down, listening to the building's last noises. Ice settling, compressors sighing, the hush when kitchens make truce, and felt the fold echo again, not as warning, not as map, but as a seam that holds when a room decides to be a place. The fold held steady against his chest. Malcolm pressed 2 fingers to the ridge through cotton, a private metronome, while the burn phone washed the hotel room in blue. Cloud footage unfurled in squares of light stainless mounts, heat lamps, hands in choreography. And he scrubbed the timeline until the quick, obscene arc froze. Contempt suspended over meat like a fly in amber, the audio catching a laugh that made the air feel cheaper. He didn't speak. He sent verbs that behaved like men with clipboards, image the drive, hash, seal, subpoena vendor logs, notify DA, pay staff during closure. The message cut through the static of the air conditioner's lie about mountains, and he laid the phone face down as if to let the orders cool into iron. Morning made the city gray at the edges. He walked back to the building with his hood low and his breath neat. Inside, the office became a lab anti-static mat like altar cloth. DVR set down like a stubborn animal. The forensic tech's calm hands making ceremony out of wires as she said, bit for bit. Then the hashes, with a voice that preferred fact to flourish. Clock drift, she said. The DA's investigator leaned closer, pen waiting like a small hammer, 27 seconds off internally. The cloud's NTP synced, she added, and Malcolm let the numbers settle, already building a spine in his head. Receipts, door sensors, hood temps, to strap the footage to time, until argument ran out of places to hide. Elena arrived with a pad that had seen fights. She rolled her sleeves as if warmth could be negotiated. If we're serious, she said, we publish the skeleton seat maps, tips, complaint routes, because trust doesn't show up for speeches, and the union pin on her jacket winked under the fluorescence like a small, blunt truth. He signed where paper asked, "Custodian" in ink that felt heavier than words. The DVR's first image ticked across a monitor, while the tech read numbers like a catechism, SHA 256 MD5, and a fixed tamper tape that bit at the plastic, like a mouth that would testify if anyone tried to feed it a lie. Midday pressed heat through the windows. A fan on the filing cabinet moved stale air with the stubbornness of a mule. The investigator built the time spine on a whiteboard: espresso at Shirar, ticket at Shiwu, hood spike at Shaluk, backdoor chirp at 19, and the neat beads of cause and witness drew a straight line right through the local gap. 2 minutes and 12 seconds, set glowing like a bruise that finally admitted itself, the fold warm. He touched it once, a habit with no superstition left in it. Naomi stepped in, hair pinned clean, the set to her shoulders a level rather than a pose, and she took a seat near the wall, while HR passed around a single sheet. "You are safe to speak. You will be paid." Portal here, that people held like a fragile cup they were being asked to drink from. They made a circle out of dining chairs. Lines perform. Circles confess. Bean went first. "Flow," she said, hands folding the paper's corner to keep them from shaking, and described routes that moved certain bodies toward the doors. Mr. Mike followed, "With your back remembers patterns," which landed with the weight of a diagnosis people had lived with and not named. Clay stood in the doorway and didn't enter. He watched with a tilt that could have been contrition or calculation. Malcolm did not call him in. He listened to a line cook describe laughter, used like a leash, then to a server admit he'd checked cards louder for hoodies than for blazers. And the circle held without clapping, because some rooms learn to applaud too soon. Phones buzzed on the table, a flock of nets. Rachel slid a printout under his hand, eyebrows raised. A gossip site had posted a headline that grinned "whistleblower" or "wrecking ball," and the comments did their math on a woman's motive until numbers forgot how to be numbers. So Malcolm said, "We don't argue with shadows," and turned the page face down. Noon arrived with engines. 2 plain sedans nosed to the curb and idled like punctuation. Plainclothes walked through the front, with posture that owed its shape to paper. Rick turned toward the back and found only the front, apron untying itself into a limp confession. The sous chef followed with a mouth full of context that would have to wait for chairs with microphones. And Clay came last with his tie, already practicing apology. The dining room held its breath. Cameras lifted like a prairie of metal stems. On the porch steps, Malcolm felt heat radiate from stone and said, "Yesterday, a customer brought us a truth we couldn't ignore," letting truth do the work while the folded napkin kept tempo under his hoodie. Then, "We're closing to rebuild, paying staff, publishing numbers," and when he gestured to Naomi, he didn't reach for her story. He made room for it. A reporter asked if this was performance. "No," he said, "procedure." The word fell flat and true. Unfriendly to drama, and he let it stay unfriendly. Because news lives longer when you give it nouns and receipts instead of polish. Inside again, the circle loosened. HR collected forms with the tenderness of a nurse changing gauze. Elena capped her pen and said, "Paper cuts count if there are enough." A small, dry smile hitching one corner of her mouth. Humor, arriving like a cool cloth instead of a laugh track. And someone in the back exhaled a thank you under their breath. He followed the tech to the lab. On the monitor, The gap glowed like a bad tooth on an X-ray. "We'll mount the image read-only," she said, "and print the spine for court." And she used a Sharpie to label the sealed case, chain intact with letters so square they looked engineered. The cap clicking home with the satisfaction of a bolt seated right. Midpoint torque hit in the form of power. A brief dip, lights thinking about leaving. The UPS caught it with a beep that carried more emotion than anyone in the room allowed themselves to show, and the text said, "If that had landed during the hash, we'd be chewing glass," then smiled without humor, and returned to work like a nurse who knows the difference between triage and luck. He walked the floor alone before the staff meal. The heat lamps sang their quiet, electric noise. Bleach ghosted the air at the edges. Under the portraits, the paint showed pale rectangles where frames had been, and he touched one with the back of his knuckle, cool, chalky, a fact you could anchor a vow to. Then watched as Naomi and Bean lifted another gilt rectangle down together. Weight shared, without instruction. Pre-climax breath came at the service doors. Naomi's palms flattened the push plates. Steam fogged the small window. She stood there, a heartbeat longer than the room required, the kind of pause that decides whether the next thing you do makes the room better or only quieter. Then let the doors swing, carrying 2 plates. Like decisions, he sat in Clay's office after sunset. The room smelled like paper clips and resignation. Clay swore in a voice that had spent years pretending it could keep a dining room from noticing certain facts. And when the investigator asked define flow, he said, "No scene, no clogs, no complaints." And the pen scratched like a small animal, escaping. "What do you want now?" Malcolm asked when the door closed. Clay's eyes found the stain in the carpet and tried to live there. "To not be the story," he said, and Malcolm nodded as if that were a request the day could grant. Then wrote 2 lines to himself on a post-it: "Redeem with truth. Pay with paper," and stuck it to the monitor's edge, like a guardrail. They printed the first dashboard before dark. Seat heat. Tip medians, complaint flow. They pinned it to the host stand in a frame clean as an invoice, and the colors looked like weather patterns inching toward something less dramatic. The legend plain enough that a child could find the bruise without help and ask if bruises always fade on their own. He stood at the front door as the last staffer left. Naomi lingered by the wall of new names, chalk dust on her fingertips. She wrote Septima Clark with a neatness that told you neatness was not compliance, then stepped back and let the letters dry like wet paint while the room recalibrated around their presence, not as decoration but as instruction. The room quieted to machinery. Compressors exhaled. Ice settled like small bones. He pressed the fold again, first a talisman, then a tool, now a seam, and felt it change, meaning against his skin. Not just a warning tucked beneath a plate, not only a map through a night, but a piece of stitching that kept fabric from tearing. When hands finally pulled in the right direction, he locked the door on a soft click. Porch light made clean geometry on stone. Down the block, the saxophone found its hinge note and held it, a door neither open nor shut, and he counted to the corner like a man who believes in measurements. 10, 30, 58. The numbers steady, even as the story shifted its weight from rumor to record. The fold lived in his pocket. Malcolm felt the ridge each time he reached for a pen. Cloth, acting like a thin backbone for decisions he didn't want to make twice. Outside the office, the dining room had been stripped of its dim glamour, candles unlit, mirrors showing daylight's brutal honesty. And the building waited the way a patient waits for the first instrument to touch skin. Chairs scraped into a circle. Rows make speeches. Circles make witness. Naomi counted breaths as HR set a stack of single sheets on a busser's tray, plain text, promising pay during closure. A QR code in the corner like a small door, ink fresh enough to smudge if someone held the paper too hard. Start where the body knows, Elena said. Her denim cuffs were dark with coffee, legal pad square on her knee. Bean cleared her throat and said flow, fingers folding the paper's corner until a damp crescent appeared, and described the way certain shoes were ushered toward the service doors under the polite choreography of efficiency. Mister, Mike spoke next. Your back remembers patterns, he said, hands open like he was showing the calluses. He talked about card checks announced louder for hoodies than for blazers, about the quiet muscle people grow from swallowing. And the room held still, listening to the slow math of repetition become a number you could point to. The office turned lab. On anti-static, the DVR sat like a stubborn animal. The forensic tech's calm spread to the cables as she imaged the drive bit for bit, calling out hash strings that read like a private scripture. And the DA investigator placed each printed value into a plastic sleeve with the fuss of a man who's lost too many cases to a smudge. Clock drifts confirmed, the tech said, 27 seconds internal. Plowed on NTP. She drew a line on the whiteboard receipt at Sherwoo, Hood Spike at Sherlock, Dorkirpot, 19, and with each bead she pinned, the local gap turned from mystery into mutilation. 2 minutes and 12 seconds preserved by everything that kept working around it. Naomi watched quietly. Her palms rested flat on her knees. In the fluorescent wash, the fold felt less like warning and more like seam. And when she stood to help Bean unhook the first gold frame from the wall, dust rose in a confetti that no one wanted, floating down on bare plaster, as if the building had been hiding chalk bones. They leaned frames along the baseboard. Rectangles of paler paint stared back. Naomi taped up temporary black paper squares and wrote with a chalk pencil Septa McClark, teacher, Edwin Harleston, painter, Charlotte Jenkins. Baker letters, clean and upright. And the room's air changed half a degree, like someone had cracked a window. The history didn't know it needed. Midday burned the glass bright. The grid at the host stand blinked to life. Rachel pinned a heat map beside the podium seats by section and time, tips by median, and said, "We publish weekly," while her laptop fan whirred at her wrist. And even the skeptics in the room looked longer than they meant to at the bruise-shaped reds cooling toward ordinary weather. A quiet beat floated up. Ice settled in the machine with a hollow sigh. No one moved for a breath, the kind of silence that decides whether a room is going to pretend or proceed. And then the espresso machine exhaled once, and the day resumed with a new, slightly cleaner noise. Anonymous reports pinged, the portal filled with verbs and the occasional knife. 2 entries arrived, mean and practiced plant. Payout. But most came steady, timestamps, and names of who was standing where. And Rachel marked each with a number instead of a label, as if refusing to let sarcasm outrun evidence was its own policy. People will accuse us of theater, Malcolm said. He didn't lean on the word like a podium. We answer with receipts, he added, and he signed custodian on another chain of custody line. The letter formed slower than his emails, but designed to survive a long, bad day in a courtroom where air conditioners fail and tempers don't. Clay appeared at the threshold. He held the doorframe with 2 fingers like a man who'd gotten seasick on land. The investigator asked him to define flow, and his gaze slid to the whiteboard, where time had been nailed down. And when he said, "No clogs, no sheens," his lawyer's wrist touched his sleeve, an instruction to stop talking that arrived a second late, Move the foretop from 12, Naomi told Bean, then hold 2 at the window. They worked the empty room as if it were full, running drills that felt like small rehearsals for decency. And when a new server asked what to say during a bias check, Naomi gave him the line, "I make this request under policy, not assumption," and made him repeat it until his mouth stopped qualifying. The tech raised a hand. UPS hiccup, but we're good, she said. A power dip had washed through like a short, bad mood. The backup beeped once and settled, and everyone laughed, a dry little laugh that had no mirth in it, because near misses feel like warnings you almost had to pay attention to with blood. Staff meal arrived early. Beans, rice, a tray of cornbread broken at the edges. They ate standing in the circle, paper plates balanced on palm, and Elena read the first draft of a Bill of Rights. No retaliation, paid time for testimony, posted criteria for promotion. And Naomi added one clean line with a pen that liked its own certainty. Safety first. Then truth, then trust. Pre-climax breath gathered by the service doors. Naomi pressed her hands to the push plates and looked through the small rectangle of glass. Steam fogged, cleared, fogged again. And in the thrum of compressors and low human talk, she felt the napkin in her memory take on its third meaning, no longer a fuse. Not only a seam, but a pattern piece, the shape you lay on cloth before you cut something new. Publish at noon, Rachel said. She lifted her phone to photograph the dashboard like a receipt. Invite comment, Malcolm said, and then invite attack, because either way the map had to live in light. And Mr. Mike drifted by and wrote, "Drink water" on the expo board with 3 exclamation points. A policy that made them laugh for real this time. They rehung one frame. Not hilt, black wood, matte, square. A photograph of Septima Clark found its level under Naomi's palm, and Bean read the caption aloud without ceremony. A class in a sentence taught literacy in church basements when the city called books contraband, and the wall accepted the weight without shifting. In the lab, the sealed case waited. Tamper tape glowed a mean red at the edges. The tech wrote "chain intact" in block letters, as if speaking to a future custodian with a long memory, and the investigator logged time possession like he was crocheting loop through loop. Nothing left to catch nails. They cleaned as if opening brooms. Cloths, sanitizer, breaking lemon over bleach. Naomi paused at table 14, not a shrine, just wood, and ran a flat palm over the grain until it warmed under her skin, then left a pitcher of water with the quiet choreography of a place learning to separate apology from repair. Evening edged the windows dark. The building's noises went lower, closer to heart. Malcolm stood beneath the last pale rectangle where a portrait had been, pressed the fold through fabric the way you test a stitch, and let himself hope for boredom, the kind that comes when a room remembers how to do its job without putting anyone on stage. He locked the door with one click. Porch light threw paper-clean shapes on the steps. Down the block, the saxophone found the hinge note, held it a beat longer than last night, and Naomi wrote 3 words on the whiteboard before she left publish. Practice. Repeat. A loop that felt less like penance and more like breath. The fold cooled, pocket to seam, seam to pattern. By the time the Oaks finished their gossip and the street went thin, the room had learned a new quiet. Not the hush of fear, but the pause sturdy places earn, and the napkin's ridge felt, for once, like something that could be set down without being forgotten. The fold pricked his ribs, cloth edge through cotton, a small ridge, reminding Malcolm to measure before he swung. In the lab's fluorescent hum, the DVR sat on anti-static like a stubborn animal, and the forensic tech's fingers moved over keys with the steadiness of a nurse finding a vein, while the UPS box muttered quietly to itself. "Clock's off 27 seconds," she said. The investigator rolled closer, pen lifted like a tiny gavel. "Clouds on time," she added, dragging a ruler across the screen to line up espresso shots. Pause prints, door chirps, each click another vertebra in the time spine they were building to carry weight when memory started lying. Outside, heat-pressed glass, lemon and old coffee mixed in the vents until the air felt sweet enough to distrust. Rachel read a vendor letter that sounded like a man clearing his throat for 3 pages. Proprietary scripts, privacy, unprecedented, and drafted a motion to compel with nouns sharp enough to cut paper. Phones blinked on the table. Portal pings threaded the morning like gnats. HR printed 3 dozen overnight reports, the shape of them a steady drum. I saw, I heard, I didn't stop it, and 2 read like knives. Plant, payout. Naomi took the stack, set it down, and said nothing while the little muscles near her jaw unclenched one by one, like lockpicks in reverse. The near fail came on a beat. Lights dipped. The room thought about forgetting. The UPS caught the blink with a chiding chirp. A progress bar froze at 92%, and then remembered its job, and the tech let out a breath that sounded like someone who has learned to listen for disaster by decibel. "Could have bricked the hash," she said. "It didn't," Malcolm answered, though sweat prickled under his collar. He touched the fold once and went back to verbs: subpoena, preserve, print. While Elena circled, "publish weekly" on the board so hard, the paper scarred, and called the vendor letter lace curtains on a boarded window. By noon, the dashboard went live. No confetti, just a link. Seat map, tip medians, complaint flow. The bruise showed where you'd expect. The legend made denial a harder sport, and the comment thread tried to pick a fight with statistics until a local data guy posted a short thread showing his math and then logged off like an adult. Midpoint torque slipped in by phone. A reporter, voice smooth, implied their portal was a filter with teeth. Rachel routed him to logs so clean they squeaked. The tech printed the audit trail with timestamps like marching feet. Malcolm said, "We root, not scrub," and hung up before the word rumor could audition as fact. An envelope arrived fat with posture. Clay's counsel wanted apology without admission, and spelled Weingarten wrong. Elena snorted, signed her name on a fresh memo. Like a signature was a kind of hammer, and Malcolm replied with payroll records and a sentence that didn't try to be clever. "I believe in redemption. It starts with truth." The building breathed in an inspector. Clipboard, cologne, tone built for warnings. "Anonymous complaint," he said, and Rachel walked him past grease traps that had been serviced 48 hours ago, receipts in plastic sleeves, Elena taking pictures like a polite spy. He left with a form that read, "Not today," and Rachel asked for a stamped copy because paper walks best with paper. Naomi sat on the second stair of the back stairwell. Light from the exit sign washed the walls green. She unfolded a printout of a gossip post, folded it back to squares until it felt like fabric, and Bean found her there, offered to fight in the comments, then laughed when Naomi said, "I want the food to be clean and the seats to be fair. Let the comments eat each other." She called home. Her mother's voice was a soft weather forecast. 2 on a 10 today. The show was silly. Ginger would help. Naomi said, "I'll bring some," and, after the call, walked to the office where Elena's draft Bill of Rights lay like a tent being raised. No retaliation. Paid testimony. Posted criteria, and added at the bottom in a hand that refused apology. Safety first. then truth, then trust. Pre-climax breath gathered over the keyboard. The tech aligned the time spine. Crooked finger precise. Cloud at. Sure seat, she murmured. Pose at. Shawu. Hood spike at. Shaluk. Door chirp at. 19 gap from. 17 to. Arsha Joe. And when she printed the spine, taped it end to end along a lab wall, the corridor turned into a museum of what happened when excuses met clocks. A second storm rolled in by way of pixels. Rick posted a dashboard cam confession shot into noon glare. He called it a smear, smirked at his own word, said soft, 3 times. And my kitchen, 5. And when screenshots of group texts, brand maintenance, card check on hoodie and 10 started breeding online, his lawyer yanked him offline by the scruff of his collar. Banter. He typed in a second post that lasted 9 minutes. Evidence. The DA called back in a supplemental. The charges on the clerk's site read like a recipe. No one should cook adulteration, tampering, conspiracy, and Naomi didn't open the link because she'd already seen enough to feed a trial. A late-day rumor tried to pick the lock. A photo of Naomi leaving the side door, blurred face, bright insinuation. Malcolm didn't release a statement. He moved her rides to the front and added a walk through near the alley. Verbs again, the kind you can put on a checklist without turning into a list person, and he stood a long moment by the host stand, until the heat map felt less like a wound and more like a thermometer doing what it's for. The saxophone down the block tested a note, steam eased out from under the dish machine, and wrote a fleeting cloud on the tile. In that small quiet, Naomi pressed the felt tip hard and moved a sticky note from requested to in progress, exclusions reversed when discovered. Apology spoken, not comped, and Mr. Mike added a heart that would have been corny if anyone else drew it. Dry humor arrived. Finally, a wine rep cracked. Got any woke Bordeaux? Near the bar, Bean stared at him with the patient gravity of a granite counter and said, "We have water," and the rep bought 2 bottles of something decent and tipped like he'd learned a new verb. Late light made the room honest. Naomi stood at a 2-top by the wall and watched the reflection of the printout frame, a future boring, durable, repetitive, the way good work has to be. She touched the shadow box where a blank napkin sat in place of the other one, the glass cool under her knuckles, and let the idea shift again past fuse, past seam, past pattern into tool waiting on a bench. Evening settled as a list, not a mood. Vendor hearing on the calendar at 11. Interviews scheduled with staff. Publication at 5. Rachel, bone-tired, traced the dashboard with her finger, the way you read a weather map, to decide whether to carry an umbrella. Malcolm counted steps to the corner out of habit, and checked a photo from the Tech Time spine printed, chain intact, in block letters that looked like they could bear weight. He paused at the threshold. The porch light threw clean rectangles on stone-like paper laid out for signatures. "Tomorrow we publish again," Rachel said, and he nodded, eyes on the wall, where new names held their ground. "Rinse and repeat," she added, half-smile. "Not rinse," Naomi said from the doorway, wiping her chalked fingers on a towel. "Scrub." He echoed it, "scrub," and the word felt right in the mouth. All bristle and pressure and circles that returned to where they started without losing progress. Down the block, the saxophone finally sat on the note it had been chasing all day. They locked the door, the building breathing through the vents, and the fold cooled from warning to habit. A seam. You check with the heel of your hand before you trust a garment to hold. The tie sat wrong at his throat. Clay tugged once, felt the synthetic rasp, and left it there like a penance. A mirror could keep him honest about The lawyer's office offered soft chairs and framed credentials in a polite grid, air cool enough to make the skin along his forearms. Remember the cost of asking for heat in winter. Here's what you say. Glaslow. The lawyer tapped bullet points with a capped pen. Structure, not seasoning. Inventory control, not line management. You enforced policy as written, he said, and pushed a printout across oak that smelled like polish and old arguments no one won cleanly. Clay nodded. He stored the lines by feel the way a server palms coins. Outside, humidity hit him like a warm towel, tossed careless. The live oaks tunneling the sidewalk into green shadow. His phone buzzing in his pocket, with texts that arrived fast enough to feel like interference cousins. A vendor with backdated affection, a number he shouldn't have saved. He silenced the world, kept walking, his jacket over his shoulder, like he couldn't decide if respectability dressed itself or needed assistance. 10 paces past the coffee shop on the corner, his chest uncaged a breath. He'd been rationing since the night the cameras skipped. He folded the breath tight and put it away again. Where a man keeps wants, he doesn't plan to indulge. The interview room smelled like carpet. Recorder on the table blinked its red light as if it had a pulse. The DA's investigator arranged papers into a stack that looked like a temper held by force, while Elena, union pin on denim, opened a legal pad and rested her wrist, as if she might switch to a hammer if the pen didn't do. Name, he gave it, role, and length of employment. And the easy stuff kept its balance until the tech cued the time spine on a portable monitor hood spike at Sherlock, door Shirpat, Shrjo. The 212 gap, pinned between witnesses like a moth. Under glass, have you used the phrase, brand maintenance? The wrist from his lawyer brushed his sleeve, a small don't. Clay looked at the screen instead, and saw his own posture reflected against stainless steel, then said, I've heard it, more than once, and felt something in his stomach pick up its chair and move to the other side of the room. What did you do when you heard it? I told them to keep the room calm. He set the words on the table like cutlery, and watched as no one reached for them, the silence doing its slow work. His hands, learning a new discipline, palms open, thumbs still. No theater. They played a clip, kitchen audio thin and tinny as a cheap speaker. Laughter like a lid dropping. A muttered line about belonging that landed with a dull knock. And Clay felt heat climb the back of his neck the way a person remembers a sunburn when a shirt collar rubs the wrong patch. After, he stood in the hallway, window over the alley. 2 bussers hunched over one phone, blue light painting their faces with borrowed attention. He wanted to tell them to get off their feet, then remembered they'd been told to look busy all their lives, and that maybe stillness had to be learned like a sentence in a second language. He went to the circle and didn't enter, listened from the door, while staff arranged chairs like a raft. Carlos, the line cook, said, I laughed so I wouldn't get picked, and the room didn't absolve him. It absorbed the sentence like ballast, and Clay's mouth found a shape that wasn't apology. Exactly, and wasn't defense either. He left before anyone said his name. The corridor's AC kicked on and thinned the air. Naomi came out of the lab with powder on her fingers from a chalk caption. She met his eyes and didn't flinch, so he said, You gave a statement, because anything else would have sounded like a plea dressed as a fact. Yes, her voice was a level, not a blade. He started a sentence I didn't know, and killed it before it learned to walk. Good, he said instead, and carried the word down the hall until it felt like a weight he'd been meaning to shoulder and hadn't. At home, quiet sat wrong too. He took the frame down, the one with the minor league game, his kid on his shoulders, Sky. Doing a good job of Sky. and set it face down on the counter beside the bowl that caught his keys and excuses. 2 fingers of something brown in a clean glass waited for a mouth that didn't want it anymore. A flyer had been shoved under his door. "Don't be the fall guy, silence is safety," in bold, the grammar of a threat pretending to be a hug. He crushed it twice and smoothed it out again, because old habits treat paper like confession, then slipped it under the stack of bills, where cowardice goes to nap. The email drafts multiplied. To staff, "I'm sorry," writing itself like a script and deleting itself like one too. To Malcolm, "I can explain," dying on the second word, as if even his laptop had limits on self-deception. And to his son, "Game this weekend," which came back fast, with "yes" and 3 exclamation points he didn't deserve but counted anyway. He drove to the water. Pelicans did math to the wind, wings solving for landing, sun pinning his shadow to the rail as if to stop him drifting. He typed Naomi with the comma and stared at it until the screen went to sleep. When it woke, the word looked worse, a name he shouldn't use to lighten his own pockets. The hearing was a room with microphones, council members in their wood, vendor rep in middle gray, the tech in flat shoes and fax. When his turn came, he sat straight and kept his hands under control, and when they asked if he'd benefited from the gap, he said, "No," and let the murmur crawl the room like a rodent that didn't know where to hide. "Do you accept responsibility for the culture?" The wrist touched his sleeve. He ignored it. "I let it live," he said, voice steady, "because you get one chance to spend steady where it pays." And the air shifted 1 degree colder, the way a kitchen feels when someone finally opens the walk-in to let the heat out. After, on the steps, an older woman stopped him, teacher energy spine like chalk, eyes that kept attendance. "We did our crying in the walk-in," she said, not unkind, so the room could look pretty. "Do better." And he started to say, "I can't hear," and didn't, because martyrdom tastes like candy on the tongue and turns to chalk before you swallow. He ate at a diner to avoid his own kitchen. Formica clean, coffee honest about itself. The waitress called him "hun" and meant nothing by it. He over-tipped to avoid being seen and left with receipt paper folded into his pocket, like a treaty he hadn't earned but wanted to honor. Night made the apartment light look expensive. He lay on the couch and let the ceiling be a ceiling, with no metaphor to carry for him. 2 sentences visited and refused to leave. "I let it live. I'm sorry." He practiced not adding context the way a bartender practices not tasting the drink, hands behind his back, so temptation doesn't think it has a shot. Midpoint pivot landed in his inbox. Rachel's email, first dashboard attached, numbers not adjectives. He clicked through seat heat, fading from red to something human. Complaint roots mapped like veins. The legend plain enough for a child, and he let the image sit until he could see his own habits in it without narrating. He tried sleep, failed, rose, paced to the window where the streetlight rode a pale stripe across the rug. On his phone, the drafts pulsed like old fish. He opened a new message with no salutation and typed 4 words that fit like a key he hadn't thought to try. "I'll testify to culture." He stared until the text turned from intention to artifact, sent it, and set the phone face down, the room exhaling with him. A quiet beat in which the AC compressor kicked, the hum found its lane, and the knot in his tie finally loosened as if it had been waiting for permission from a sentence. Morning returned with its list. He ironed a shirt because shirts act on you even if you don't act on them. In the mirror, the collar sat better. His hands found a practice open, still, visible, that looked like the absence of theater, and felt like the start of a skill. He walked to the plaza before work. Kids chased a pigeon that refused to participate. A bus kneaded the curb with sighs. He touched the corner of his mouth to check for the old smile, and left it undisturbed, then counted steps to the courthouse, because counting keeps certain men from running. 10 to the curb, 30 to the crosswalk, the rest to a door that didn't yet know it would open when he pushed. The fold pressed a line into his palm. Malcolm stood at the back of the chamber, cloth ridge in his pocket, acting like a small backbone, while the air tasted of varnish, dust, and the ghost of old cigars that the building pretended it had never known. Microphones blinked their red pupils along the dais, oak seal glowering above nameplates, the benches filling with aprons and suits, and neighbors who had traded television for policy. And the room held that pressurized quiet you get right before words start accruing weight. The clerk called it to order. Papers shuffled like birds. A bailiff's boot heel ticked on stone as if keeping time for a story that wanted to outrun itself. And the vendor's man rose, in a medium gray suit, engineered to avoid adjectives. Routine maintenance, he said. Unexpected behavior, he said again, offering incense in the form of acronyms. When a council member slid her glasses up and asked whether the patch hit at 2142 as the hash logs suggested, he did the polite dodge, said their systems executed a task, not a push, and let his throat betray him with a swallow that traveled too far. The forensic tech didn't clear hers. Flat shoes, steady hands, voice tuned to gravity. We imaged the DVR bit for bit. SHA256 and MD5 verified, she said, placing a page beneath the document camera so the monitors bloomed with number lines, then chalked the time spine in clean beads espresso at Shirar, Ticket at Shawu, Hood Spike at Sherlock, Door Chirp at 19, pinning the 2 minutes 12. Like a butterfly that had thought itself invisible. A hum rose, restless. Contained, heat from bodies lifted the smell of wool. She aligned the cloud feed to the spine, let the local gap glow like a bad tooth on X-ray. And when someone tried the word glitch from the vendor's row, she didn't look over. She said, "Noise is random. This is AIM," and capped her marker without drama. Bean testified next, hands folded to keep them from broadcasting. Flow meant carry them toward the back. When the room needed to look a certain way, she said, eye line fixed on a patch of woodwork, as if reading her lines there, and the clerk's pen wrote flow and underlined it twice, because even pens know when a word has turned into policy. Mr. Mike took the seat like a man sitting in a choir he'd tried not to join. Your back remembers patterns, he said, then waited. No one filled the pause, and he explained card checks announced louder for hoodies than for blazers. The way laughter can act like a leash if the right person holds the handle. His hands describing nothing and everything over the table. Mia came with her jaw set and her phone logs printed clean. She didn't look at the cameras. I texted my friend 2 weeks before, she said, and the document camera showed the bubble wish I could say something in a banal font that made the words feel heavier. The timestamp clicking alive like a small, precise metronome. No one could shout down. Quiet fell, deep enough to hear HVAC. The seal on the wall looked older suddenly. Malcolm felt the fold in his pocket go from warning to witness, a seam against his thumb, while he kept the back wall and watched the dais do the math. None of them could say yet out loud. Naomi's name called the oxygen tighter. She carried one card, more white than ink. The clerk swore her in, and Naomi answered I do with a tone that had found its footing. Eyes not for the cameras, but for a place on the wood where other hands had kept promises or tried. I was the only black server on staff. The sentence stood straight and didn't wobble. I watched a pattern seat itself here. and call itself flow. I saw a chef do what you saw on the screen, and I wrote it down so a man wouldn't have to swallow contempt called dinner, she said. Then let silence do the work, speeches ruin. A council member tried the classic cut. Some say the napkin was staged. Naomi tipped her head, a small acceptance of weather, and said, "Attention is what happens when you burn a steak. Then, truth is what you write on cloth because your hands are clean and the kitchen isn't, and the room's shoulders came down half an inch." Midpoint torque arrived, disguised as restraint. The chair thanked her without flourish. Malcolm kept his place, eyes on the monitors where hash values held steady as freight, and felt the fold change again. Seam into pattern piece, something you lay against cloth before you make the cut that decides what the garment will be. When it was his turn, he didn't clear his throat either. He set a single sheet on the lectern, numbers, not adjectives. We closed voluntarily. We paid staff. We published our seating map, median tips, and complaint routes. We're requesting bail conditions. No contact with staff, he said. Then, this wasn't a bad apple. It was a broken tree, and let broken sit there without the theater of outrage. "Is this PR?" a council member asked, voice lawyer smooth. "No," he said, "public responsibility." He didn't look at Naomi to steal light. He kept his gaze on the dais, where paper lives, and somewhere in the back row, an old man who had once bussed plates in a different decade breathed as if he'd been trying to argue with air for years, and air had finally decided to go along. The DA's investigator rose last. He didn't recite. He placed, based on the evidence, the image DVR corroborated statements. The vendor's maintenance event aligned to the missing interval. "We're filing charges for adulteration, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to obstruct," he said. And he said it like a menu, not a sermon, because meals you can eat, sermons you argue with. The chair banged the gavel. Red lights blinked off, like eyes going to sleep. People stood in a wave that smelled of coffee and nerves and applause that didn't happen because hearings don't clap. Still, the lobby carried a pressure that felt like the moment after a stitch finally holds. A reporter reached for Naomi in the aisle. "Cancel culture." He tried, hand hovering. She didn't break stride, didn't sharpen. "We're unfailing a culture," she said, and kept walking, sentence clean enough to frame without becoming content for a fight. On the steps, the city changed temperature. Humidity took back its ground. The oaks whispered their old gossip. An older woman stopped Malcolm teacher posture, attendants taking eyes, and said, "We did our crying in the walk-in so the room could look pretty," and he nodded. Because sometimes the truest thing in a day is the line that doesn't ask anything of you. Naomi paused under the seal carved over the door. She looked small in the stone and not small at all. Bean stood at her shoulder. Mr. Mike at the other, a triangle formed by people who have carried hot things and learned how not to drop them, and for a moment they let the stairwell's hum fill their chests where words had been. Someone held a sign just off the curb. "Publish," then fix in block letters a child could copy. Rachel snapped the first dashboard to the city site again. No confetti, just a link. While the vendor rep tried the side exit and found cameras move faster than steps, his gray suit finally attracting an adjective he hadn't planned for. Dry humor nudged the day. A kid tugged his mother's sleeve and asked, "What's a time spine?" "It's how you keep a story from lying," she said. And the answer pleased him so much. He repeated time spine, the way children test a new tool against the world until it makes a dent. Pre-climax breath collected inside the now empty chamber. Malcolm lingered in the doorway, listening to the building's low machines. The fold in his pocket cooled. seam into pattern, into something else he didn't have a word for yet, and the silence felt less like a pause and more like a room checking whether it could hold the next piece of weight. Phones vibrated in pockets. One ping from an unknown number found him. "I'll testify to culture." 4 words, "no signature," and he read them twice, understood the cost buried in their brevity, then slid the phone away without replying. Because sometimes the right answer is to make space and move the microphone. Outside, the plaza found it slow. Reporters packed cords, aprons checked watches. Neighbors decided whether to go home or become witnesses. Naomi stepped off the last stair, and a woman pressed a folded square of linen into her hand blank and said, "In case you need another page," and Naomi's fingers closed around it with the careful pressure you use when you're not sure if the thing you're holding is fragile or dangerous. The vendor rep, suddenly without a script, tried to summon complication. Words about patches, about context. Tripped. The forensic tech walked past him, carrying a sealed box labeled "chain intact" in block letters that looked like they could hold a bridge. He glanced at it and found his language operating at a deficit he hadn't planned. Evening edged in, not dramatic, just inevitable. The chamber lights dimmed to a hum. The seal on the wall resumed its wooden patience. Malcolm stood at the foot of the steps and watched the sign Bob once publish, then fix, then turn down the sidewalk, and he felt the fold toward what it had become, not just cloth, not just seam, but a narrow hinge between a private courage and a public habit. He didn't speech. He counted steps: 10 to the curb, 30 to the crossing, 58 to a door that would lock with one honest click. Behind him, the building exhaled through its vents. Ahead, the street gathered its ordinary noise, and, in his pocket, the cloth crease settled like a rule. You check with your thumb not because you doubt it, but because it reminds your hand what work feels like when it finally starts to hold. The fold cooled into habit. Malcolm pressed the crease through cotton while the office lights hummed and noon heat licked the windows. On his screen, a dashboard sat open like an honest ledger seat, heat easing out of the corners, median tips flattening to the good kind of plain, and somewhere down the hall, the ice machine sighed, the way machines do when they've done enough for a minute. A notification jumped. A video, posted at lunch, windshield glare over a steering wheel. Rick's face filled the frame, jaw tight, eyes dancing between rehearsal and dare, and his voice carried the scrape of a man who believed a camera was a weapon until it turned on him. "I didn't do what they're saying." He smirked at the accident of his own pun, then said soft 3 times as if repetition could make a slur into a policy. He whispered brand maintenance into the phone like prayer, hit upload, and sat back, pleased, until comments arrived with screenshots like receipts kept in a shoebox group texts from the line, emojis colliding with orders, seat the circus by the back. Card check on hoodie in 10. Humor tried to save him. It didn't. The DA's office filed a supplemental in clean type, and the clerk's site coughed up charges: adulteration, tampering, conspiracy that looked like a recipe you only make once before you throw the book away. Work kept moving. Rachel stacked vendor logs beside subpoenas. The forensic tech labeled a sealed drive, "chain intact," in letters square enough to stand on, and Elena underlined "no retaliation" on a handout, then underlined it again until the paper sharpened under the pen. Inside the dining room, chalk dust floated like soft weather. Naomi set a level against the wall and guided a black frame up a 1/4 inch with 2 fingers. Beneath it, a caption, "Charlotte Jenkins, Baker." kept the lights on during the hurricane, so neighbors had somewhere to stand under and say nothing together, settled the air. Two servers stopped and read before they remembered tickets don't plate themselves. Service rehearsals ran without saying training. Card checks. Naomi asked from the circle. A new server, wide-eyed but steady, recited the line, "I ask under policy, not assumption," and said it again until the sentence stopped wobbling and could carry plates. Table by the window. Bean called. 2. Stroller. Brace. Naomi flipped the grid with her thumb, moved a hold like a chess piece, and when the couple arrived late, blown, she walked them to a booth that wasn't a favor, just a seat, then slipped a small folded card to the host. "Thank you for your patience. We seat by time." The host nodded, tucked the card under the keyboard, and smiled like a person who'd been given a tool, not a script. Midpoint torque came as a sound. A beep, then a phone's swallow. Rick's second video went up, eyes brighter, voice faster, banter, "My kitchen," context, and lasted 9 minutes before his lawyer pulled the plug. But not before a line cook in another city stitched it with a bored face and 4 words, "Evidence has a temper." The inbox bloomed with the messy stuff. A spilled confessional from a vendor trying to flirt with innocence. A panel invite that wanted the story without the spreadsheets. Rachel hit delete on the panel, sent the vendor to legal, and taped a printout of the dashboard to the host, stand in a frame as plain as an invoice. She pointed at the legend and said, "Numbers don't like attention. They like light." A delivery guy propped the back door open with his foot. Steam rolled out from the dish pit and hugged his knees. "Y'all on the news again?" He grinned. "And Mr. Crate," Mike said, "we publish," wiping his hands on a towel that had survived a week, then added with a grin that didn't ask for agreement, "and we drink water." And the delivery guy raised his bottle like a toast to competence. Between runs, Naomi checked the bulletin board. Requests for change stood in lifelines. Family meal at 4, so dish eats hot. No comp in place of apology. Saxophonist tab on opening. She moved 3 notes, from in progress to done, with a felt tip that left small tails on every line, then hovered over one stubborn square bar corners still read at 9, and dragged it only halfway. Because honesty moves in inches if you let it. In the lab, the time spine lay taped end to end along a wall. Receipts pinned to minutes. Door chirps like metronome ticks. The tech ran a finger along the printed line, reverent without being sentimental, and said, "Cloud at Shasik, Posat, Shawu, Hood Spike, Shaluk, Door, Shajo." Gap still sings at 17 to Arshajo, and the song it sang now sounded less like conspiracy and more like a bad habit caught mid-chorus. A chalk pause. Naomi's thumb smudged a ghost from the wall and left a cleaner rectangle behind. She imagined a future where the portraits were ordinary, where nobody stared long because they'd grown up knowing these names, and let the thought pass, not because it wasn't worth keeping, but because tables still needed clearing and names don't seat themselves. The saxophonist outside chased a phrase until it agreed to be music. Heat crawled down the alley and sat on the dumpster lids. Naomi checked on a server's hands, 3 tiny burns wrapped like punctuation, then opened the walk-in to let a wall of cold bless her face. A quiet beat in green light where vegetables watched like monks. Near close, a man at the bar tried a line. "Got any?" "Woke Bordeaux," he said, smirking. Bean didn't smile. She poured him water. "Room temperature activist," she said, deadpan, and he blinked, tipped heavy, and changed the subject to fish. Paper tightened like a belt. The judge granted the vendor subpoena. The DA calendared arraignments. Malcolm sent one email with 2 lines, "Will proceed without theater, publish at 5, and then walked the floor, the fold in his pocket shifting against the rhythm of his steps, like a hinge that had learned everyone's weight. Mid-evening, a small complication. A wheelchair grazed a chair leg. The room winced. Naomi arrived with a hand on the back. Face unalarmed, voice low. "We're moving the world closer for you," and tightened the aisle by 2 inches, while Mr. Mike stilled the dish machine's roar with a tap. After, the woman's fingers found the table edge, breathing leveled, and something in the room's shoulders dropped. Pre-climax breath held under the service doors. Naomi pressed her palms to the push plates and looked through the little rectangle of glass. Steam fogged, cleared, fogged again. Behind her, the hood's hum settled. In front, the pass glowed clean. The fold in her pocket, fresh linen, blank, felt less like a hazard and more like a promise, not written yet. They ate staff meal in the circle, beans and rice. Cornbread split by hand. Elena read the final draft of the Bill of Rights. No retaliation. Paid time for testimony. Posted criteria for promotion. And Naomi added a line that made the pen hesitate. And then commit. "We do not perform diversity. We practice it at the door." Rick's lawyer called for silence. The internet didn't care. Comment threads boiled, then cooled to a simmer when the dashboard posted on time again, and a local data nerd wrote a 4-tweet explanation of the binning method that got 8 likes and changed 3 minds, which is 3 more than speeches usually do. The kitchen turned quieter than usual. Cutting boards, bearing scars like maps. Naomi adjusted a cook's grip. Knuckle close. Blade stable. Charlotte arrived later with a box of shrimp and a laugh that could outlast a flood. Laid a plate on the pass and said, "Build tables, not walls." Then tapped the posted commitments and added, "Check who's still standing by the sink." They added a card to the menu's back. House commitments. Seat by time. Publish numbers. Pay staff during closures. Fix harm. Don't comp it. Fail. Repair. Mr. Mike underlined both hot beneath. "We serve food and dignity," and grinned like a man who finally got the order of operations he'd been teaching alone. Clay's email arrived without drama. A list of procedures. Clear-eyed. Specific. Signed. Rachel filed it where paper keeps aid and sent a polite request for a sworn statement on flow. And his reply came in the kind of plane that can hold a cross. "I let it live." Evening lowered itself onto the block. The oak leaves caught what breeze there was and rationed it. Malcolm stood by the shadow box, where a blank napkin sat in the soft dark like a tool wrapped for later use. He watched the heat map cool in real time, one stubborn corner still red, and felt both patience and the itch to fix argue quietly, like brothers who love each other more than they admit. Dry humor visited one last time. A server, wrists taped, eyed the dashboard and said, "If boredom's the goal, we're flirting." Rachel smiled without wasting teeth and answered, "Let's make boredom jealous." Then slid the week's CSV to a public folder. The way you leave the hall light on for a teenager who's earning their way home. They killed the glow one switch at a time. Candles pinched. Mats rolled. Stainless wiped until it held fingerprints like a memory rather than a stain. Naomi locked the front door and rested her forehead against the glass, breath fogging a small oval that faded slow. A quiet, private weather where days begin and end. Outside, the saxophonist packed his horn. A car idled, then decided to keep going. Malcolm counted to the curb 10 and to the crossing 30, and to the corner 58 numbers, easing him through a night that didn't need speeches, only proof. The fold cooled in his pocket. Not a fuse anymore. Not just a seam. Not only a pattern piece. As he walked, he let it become what the day had asked it to be, a simple tool, folded clean, ready on the bench for the hands that would need it when rooms forget, as rooms do, and someone has to remind the fabric how to hold. The fold waited under glass. A blank linen square sat in the shadow box by the host stand, its crease catching a line of porch light, the room around it smelling of fresh paint, lemon oil, and the metallic hush of polished cutlery waiting for hands. Malcolm stood just inside the door with his hood down, counting breaths while the air hummed with compressors and nerves, the building holding its new posture as if a tailor had finally found the seam. They didn't hang a ribbon. They turned the sign to open and let the bulbs warm. Naomi ran a thumb over the edge of the frame, then stepped back to watch the first faces bend in the glass. Tourists with map-creased knuckles. A young couple herding a stroller like a small ship. Two-line cooks from another joint, smelling faintly of garlic and heat. Circle. Rachel called. Chairs slid. Souls whispered on wood. The pre-shift huddle breathed beans and coffee, and the soft rasp of staff shirts, and on the expo board Mr. Mike had written the day's verbs in chalk. Listen. Seed fair. Ask twice. Write it down. Drink water. Each word a rung that could take weight. We move slow enough to notice, Naomi said, and we correct loud enough to learn, Rachel added, scanning the seating grid. Bean tucked a pen behind her ear and grinned with half her mouth, the only kind of smile that counts in a kitchen, then held up a card for the new host. Thank you for your patience. We seat by time, a sentence to hand out instead of an apology to spend. Doors breathed. Air from the street folded in with salt and perfume. The first party came early and nervous, asking if the corner was too much trouble. The host shook her head, slid the grid, and guided them to a window where afternoon light laid a clean, pale stripe across the table like paper, ready for signatures. The room found its rhythm like a band tuning. Flatware ticked, glassware chimed, the hood hummed at a new pitch. Under the new frames on the wall, black wood. Matte captions held steady in a clean hand. Septima Clark, teacher. Edwin Harleston, painter. Charlotte Jenkins, baker. People stopped reading after the second line, then went back and read the third because the air asked them to. A couple in their 70s sat beneath Septima. The man's suit had seen more weddings than funerals. The woman's earrings caught light the way memory does. Congratulations, she told Naomi when water hit the table, voice tasting of mint gum and church basements. And when the trout arrived, the plate steamed a brief halo across the glass. Mid-service brought the small tests. A wheelchair grazed a chair leg. The room held its breath. Naomi slid in, shifted the aisle with her hip, voice low and unremarkable. We're moving the world closer, and Mr. Mike eased the dish machine off a notch so conversation could survive. A quiet beat where cold from the walk-in touched ankles like mercy. At the bar, 3-line cooks from down the block ordered the cheapest beer. Shoulders unhooking, hands stained with whatever they'd served an hour ago. Looks different, one said, peering at the wall. Feels different, another answered, and the third nodded, then added, dry. If boredom is the goal, you folks are flirting, earning a tired laugh from Bean that still found teeth. A man in a blazer approached the host stand with a chest full of reservation. We didn't book, he said, braced for judgment. 20 minutes, the host said, eyes on the grid, and when he blinked at the absence of performance, she added, bar seats are yours if you want. and he folded the weight into his pocket like a receipt that made sense. Midpoint, the fold returned. Not under glass, under skin. Naomi felt the napkin's idea at her ribs. The crease that once warned becoming a rule her hands obeyed without thinking. She reached for the expo bell and stopped, not to listen for applause, but to hear the hood's song settle back to even after the rush. A stroller squeaked over a rough board. The baby slept like a politician who hasn't learned shame. Bean slid 2 chairs 1 inch without eye contact, and when the father mouthed, "Thank you," Naomi tapped the grid at the window and moved a hold. No one would notice. The movement, as small as a bias check, whispered in your own mouth. At the counter, a middle-aged man leaned toward the wall. "Text. This politics?" he asked, thumb hitching at the commitments card. "Yes," Naomi said, not unkind, not soft. And when the man waited for a fight that could keep him whole, she added, "Fairness is civic work done in a restaurant." And he nodded, surprised to find himself paying attention instead of paying to not. The saxophone outside found a new phrase. It lifted, failed, tried again, amused by its own stubbornness. Steam off a big pot rode a cloud along the ceiling's shadow and faded. The room breathed through it. The AC kicked. Laughter moved from sharp to warm the way it does when you decide to stay a while. A server at table 6 started to apologize for the wait and caught herself, "Thank you for your patience," she said instead, the line landing square. Her guest, hands like someone who turns wrenches, nodded as if he'd been waiting for exactly that much dignity, and then asked about the collards, which held the plate like a shoulder that doesn't give. Pre-climax breath gathered at the service doors. Naomi pressed her palms to the stainless push plates and leaned her forehead to the small rectangle of glass. Steam fogged, cleared, fogged, a métronome for décision. On the other side, the pass glowed steady. Behind, the dining room's light thinned to evening. The fold inside her became again something else. Not a fuse, not only a seam, not just a pattern piece, but a hinge you grease, so a door stops squealing and simply works. Near 8, a reporter slid onto a bar stool trying not to be a story. "Comment," she asked. "Tote bag." Swallowing a microphone. "Numbers are online," Rachel said, eyes on the grid, "Food's hot," and the reporter ordered gumbo, ate it too fast, and wrote a line in her notebook that would later read like restraint, a hiccup, small but sharp. A young server asked for a card too loud at table 10. Naomi stepped beside him, voice pitched for the 2 people who mattered. "We ask under policy, not assumption," she said, slower than usual, and the man's hand dropped from the credit card he was about to brandish like proof. The woman's grip unwound from her napkin, and she asked about dessert. An older busboy from another lifetime shuffled in with a boy in a blazer too big. "Window or wall?" the host asked. "Wall that can hear," the old man said, and they set him beneath Charlotte Jenkins. He showed the boy how to set the fork to say, "I'm still open to what's coming," and the boy nodded, solemn as a pledge. The kitchen steadied. Cut boards showed their scars like maps you don't hide anymore. Mr. Mike patted the dish machine after its last cycle like a dog that had run hard and come home, then wrote both hot under the commitments card with a pencil that looked like it had opinions. Closing crept, then asked to be let in. Candle nubs pinched out. Mats rolled. The heat map on the host's screen cooled in slow, honest gradients. One corner still red like a stubborn rash. Tagged for tomorrow. Bean counted tips without ceremony, lips moving with the numbers as if prayer had learned to do math. Rachel saved the day's CSV and dragged it to the public folder. a habit that felt like leaving a porch light on. Outside, the saxophonist tucked his horn away. A car idled long enough to confess something, then left. The oaks held their gossip in their leaves, choosing not to shed. The air tasted less like friction and more like a room exhaling after company. Naomi locked the door and leaned her forehead to the glass, breath fogging a small oval that grew and thinned and finally went clear. Tomorrow, Rachel asked, stacking menus like thin bricks. Publish, practice, repeat. Naomi said, then added, because the day had earned it, and soup, which made Mr. Mike grin as if someone had remembered the order of operations again. Malcolm stood by the shadow box. The folded napkin caught a last sliver of light, crease shining like a horizon line. He lifted a hand toward the glass, not to touch, just to mark the space between symbol and tool, then stepped back and let the room exist without him. The best trick a person with power can learn. On the porch, the steps held the clean rectangles of light, like paper laid out for signatures. He counted to the curb 10 and across 30, and to the corner 58 numbers that felt less like superstition and more like a promise to keep measuring when the music got quiet. Behind him, the room settled. Ahead, the street turned normal. In his pocket, the idea of the fold stayed warm without needing a pocket at all. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The hinge tone he'd been hearing for months, between rooms, between habits, hung once in the night, then resolved into something steadier. Not triumph, not elegy, just a door that opens and opens and opens until one day nobody remarks on it. The fold waited under glass, then under skin, then in the work, passed from hand to hand until it stopped being a story and became a way to hold the fabric when it matters.